Welcome to Living a Full Life podcast. Join us as we explore health topics that encourage raising healthy children, living a healthy life, and living the best life possible. Now, here's your host.
Hey everyone, welcome to Living a Full Life podcast. Dr. Enrico Dolcecore here again, and that special guest I promised you, finally got him on this. We were up in Canada trying to do this live, and thanks to Air Canada, I lost my bag, I lost my audio equipment, and I was like, Colin, I'm going to come, it's going to show up, and it ended up not showing up. So we're doing this the old-fashioned way, but I swear I was right there in Calgary wanting to do this live, but here we are. Thank you, Colin, for being on the show.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So for all the peeps in Calgary, I know you're listening. You're not very vocal, but you do listen. I can see the downloads. Technology today shows you where in the world people are listening, and Calgary has been good to us. Colin is in your neighborhood. He's down in Bowness. He's in Northwest Calgary. This clinic is Vive Integrative Health, and it is a place to definitely look into to either stay well, prevent, or if you're in trouble, definitely talk to Colin. He's a wealth of knowledge. We're going to build off of my dad's story with colon cancer back in 2011, stage 3. He did everything he could through what Colin recommended. I mean, let's touch a little bit about that. IV therapy, reducing inflammation, and the things that we did. And I'll add the things that we did outside of your clinic to help with, fighting cancer. We're right in the thick of the war with that. I'm talking about using naturopathic medicine to prevent issues. But what do you think we did there that worked so well?
Oh yeah, good question. I mean, I think you hit the point right on the mark. It really takes a broad approach to looking at whatever we're facing to have the best possible outcomes. And that includes cancer, of course. And just to quickly touch on that, the conventional approach is pretty limited in what they offer. We're all very familiar with that. But what really ought to happen for most of us to really optimize our outcomes is to really broaden that approach. And the benefit of that is to help to, first and foremost, improve the efficiency or the effectiveness of the cancer therapies that are being offered conventionally. And that's important. We can truly improve the effect of chemotherapy or radiation, etc., just by making sure that we're doing all the right things for ourselves and supporting our bodies and strengthening our bodies while we're sort of attacking that cancer. So the broader approach is going to be helpful in that, but also we're going to help to minimize side effects and help to keep our energy up and help to keep our spirits up, and all those kinds of things are just as important as we're going through cancer therapy. Now, when it comes to approaching cancer, what you and your dad were doing were exactly the right things. Helping to make sure that your body is being strengthened in every possible way is critical. Now, just to step back from that a second, and just to touch on what naturopathic medicine is and what we do, well, that's really a large part of it. If you imagine, a typical or average medical consult, certainly here in Canada, it's pretty short in duration, to the point, and it doesn't really go into a whole lot of depth oftentimes. Now, a consult with a naturopathic doctor will be somewhat different. We're going to be looking much more in depth, and we're going to dive deep below the surface of what's going on, deep below what the symptoms are, to try to find what those underlying causes are and what are the ultimate fundamental causes of the dysfunction that is leading to the symptom. The symptom itself isn't really the problem. The causes are the problem. And so if we're able to tackle those, if we're able to relieve or resolve the causes, well, then the symptoms disappear, but we also leave that person in much better physiological state, and therefore more energy, feeling better, living better. And one can certainly hope that they're going to, continue down their path of life better as a result of that. Does that make sense?
It does. Wonderful. I love how you brought in, medicine and the shortened times that we have. Even across the world, I've had family in Europe. I've been here in the States. The time we spend with our medical doctors is very short, and it's because they're under pressure. It's just the way it is. They're seeing, 100 patients a day. It's just the systems that we've created because of insurance and universal healthcare, whatever it may be, whatever country you're in. The same strangleholds happen, and it's trickle down effect to the doctors. They're burnt out. They really are. And Christine's gotten into functional medicine, and the same thing. She's exhausted at the end of the day, as I'm sure you are, because the amount of energy you put into the patient to truly understand their health history, which is the most important piece of the examination process, it takes a toll, and you cannot see 100 patients in a day. I mean, you yourself cannot do that, and Colin doesn't do that, and neither can Christine, because you need to take time with your patients, and that's the difference, and that's why things are missed, and that's why things can be caught early and diagnosed properly. A proper diagnosis goes a long way. I'm glad you brought that up. But continue on naturopathic medicine. Just educate us on, what it is. And you can seek this out. And a lot of naturopathic doctors can do virtual.
Yes.
Virtual, you can do that way as well.
Right. And I think one of the ways that I describe naturopathic medicine, to start with, is just imagine a big, long spectrum, that stretches the length of your arm. And this is the spectrum of what all medicine is. Now, what is typically offered to us by, these very knowledgeable, very bright medical doctors, or doctors of osteopathic medicine as well in the States, is just a small segment, a small fraction of that larger spectrum. And there can be good things in there sometimes, particularly if we're, having some sort of acute episode, we've broken a bone, we're having a heart attack, whatever the case might be. We certainly want to utilize what conventional medicine has. But sometimes the things we truly need to help to get our body in a better state are found outside of that little zone. And despite the research, despite the knowledge, despite the clinical outcomes that have been, recognized in clinics all over the world, it takes a very long time for that knowledge to be integrated into that small little box that is typically offered to us. And so imagine having all of this knowledge, all of this experience, and it's not being offered to us. So this is where we start to turn to naturopathic doctors and others who have a broader scope of practice and a broader breadth of knowledge to help to bring those things to us, because oftentimes we'll find some complementary strategies that can be run in parallel, or perhaps alternative strategies that are going to look deeper into the issue than the conventional strategy will.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The time that's there. Now, are you focused on oncology? Is that a niche of your practice?
It is a niche of my practice. It's part of my practice only, though. I find it actually, it's useful to have quite a breadth of practice. And I see a lot of complex chronic illness, cancer being part of that. But I find it's useful to have the recognition of some of these elements of health and well-being and human physiology outside of cancer, to be able to put context into what's going on with the cancer, particularly in the realms of understanding what are the causes? How did this person develop cancer? What are those initial inflammatory triggers, or what are the things that put their body in a state that was, so to speak, hospitable to cancer developing?
Yeah. And, when I speak to now Colin's and I'm not tuning him just because he's on my show, one of the most intellectual doctors I have met. He's just a very smart person, and you're able to communicate that to the patient. There's two things. I've met very smart people with improper bedside manner because they're just too high level. And we know those people. You are just right there where you can also convert it, which is super great because your patients come out more knowledgeable. But I am the opposite. I think I'm smart, but my patients like me because I make it too simple for them. I make it very simple. So we'll talk about cartoons and analogies and all that stuff about health, but the patient walks away with it. Because I read a piece of literature showing that, the average newspaper and the average book to the masses is written in a third grade level. And ever since I read that, I'm like, holy smokes, I am talking way too much about the details, but you do such a good job on that. So I'm going to go into the cartoon version of cancer, and then you're going to amplify this a little bit higher when we talk about cancer. So cancer is an inflammatory disease. Yes or no? Okay. Yes, it is. So inflammation in the body is created because of many different stressors, physical, chemical, and emotional. But typically the chemical component of the foods that we eat can create inflammation, and it's the most common cause of inflammation. But improper use of the body can do that too. Number two is so we need to understand what cancer is. What is cancer? Are these injected cells into the body? Are they foreign objects that go into the body? Or what is cancer? Explain your definition of cancer. What are they?
Right. Okay. Let's just, I'll get into that in a second.
Oh, good.
What is cancer? That's a big question to answer.
Huge, right?
Before that, speaking of inflammation, and yes, yes, cancer is ultimately an inflammatory disease, and the greater our level of inflammation in the body, the greater our propensity to develop cancer. But the reason for that is, rather interesting. And this is very much in line with, what's being learned with human physiology and how the body ages over the last 20 years or so. There's groups of researchers around the world who are understanding better what the mitochondria is doing and how our metabolism, our energy production, and something called NAD levels are fluctuating as we age. The mitochondria are responsible for helping to make sure that the cell stays healthy. A cell that's staying healthy has healthy mitochondria, it has healthy metabolism, which is to say it's producing energy very, very well. And if that's the case, the cell's good and it's unlikely to develop cancer. But what are the things that can impair the metabolism and the mitochondria? Inflammation is a big part of that. So inflammation, if it's increased in the body as a whole, it's going to affect the body in a multitude of different ways. But we want to recognize that the mitochondria are severely affected by that, which leads to a susceptibility to all kinds of illness, cancer being one of those. So inflammation leads to mitochondrial illness or sometimes failure. But there are other things that can lead to mitochondrial failure as well. And this is why cancer is such an interesting condition, because, viruses can cause cancer. Bacteria can cause cancer. There are chemicals, toxins, carcinogens that can cause cancer. Radiation can cause cancer. What is it about all of these different things that can trigger a cell to become cancerous? Well, ultimately, it seems there's a variety of different things here at play also, but the mitochondria are affected by all of those. And if the mitochondria are failing, then that cell is unable to protect itself from becoming cancerous. So this is something we want to be mindful of with respect to cancer as a whole. So into your next question, which was more about, well, what is cancer? There's a variety of different traits of cancer. We won't go into them all, but one of the primary ones that we all recognize is that cancer cells are cells that have lost their ability to control their growth. And they grow and grow, and they divide, and they do this sort of without anything able to stop them. And this is what cancer ultimately is, and one of the things we want to help to. The process that we want to stem and discourage. When we're treating cancer, we obviously want to be mindful of all of the contributors that would have come together to allow that cancer to develop in the first place. And those include inflammation, but we also want to be mindful of what is allowing that cancer to continue to thrive. And so this is very often where the food and the nutrition and the environment of our body that you were alluding to earlier really comes into play, because it's the food that can make a big difference in how our genes are being transcribed and, telling our body what to do. It's the sugar that can help to, create growth in the cancer cell or deter growth. Various different diets and various different foods have supportive outcomes for the cancer patient. In a nutshell sort of version, I'll sort of leave it at that, Enrico. But is there anything else you wanted me to sort of elaborate on within that?
No, I knew you'd take it one step above, and you brought in mitochondria and all that stuff. But it's great, and we wrapped up perfectly, because at the end of this, it's the environment that these I teach as atypical cells in the body. We have all of our cells are typical. They're typically programmed. They're typically DNA structured. They're typically running the systems that they're supposed to run. And even though we have some atypical cells in our body, it doesn't mean they're going to adapt into a tumor or cancer in itself. But if those over proliferate, if we get too many atypical cells due to carcinogenic exposure, radiation, whatever it may be, that's where cancer starts to proliferate. And you went into the mitochondria. I keep it pretty simple for my patients. I say, listen, cancer loves an acidic environment. They love sugar, and they really don't need much oxygen. It's our body's natural way, our natural cells' way to survive a hostile environment. It's kind of a beautiful thing, as morbid as that sounds, that the human body will change to atypical cells to try and survive. Unfortunately, it will damage a system in the body that could be lethal, but it's adaptability in that. So that's where we go. And that's where people need, the cancer diagnosis is such an emotional stress for people. And that's enough to change everything that they do, the way they think, the way they eat, the way they move. They'll quit their jobs. They'll move to Hawaii. They'll do whatever it takes. But that's how I did it. But you brought in the whole reason of why it happens is mitochondrial stress within the cells, and that's what makes them atypical. So, but understanding these simple things, even though mitochondrial physiology is not simple in any way. Oh man, I'm getting nauseous just thinking about the Krebs cycle. But anyways, that's so important, right? So going into these things and maybe kind of talking about cancer and the sugar and the acidity and the oxygen and how that plays a big role in fighting all this and what you guys do. Because there's, like you said, there's so many different ways to help patients with this. And I know there's no way for us to just talk about one cancer and that's the same treatment for everyone. But how do you address the acidity? How do you address the sugar? And how do you address getting more oxygen?
Yeah, good question. And you're right about those. This is really great the way that we're bouncing back and forth here, because you really do simplify what I'm trying to elaborate on. And it makes it much more palatable for your listener. I'm very, very sure of that. Thank you. But going back to the atypical cells, yes, we want to control, what they're doing. And the sugar is probably the biggest part of that. Some of you who might have lived through this or looked through this before recognize already that cancer cells do thrive on sugar. And so, it's been said before that, you give a cancer cell lots of sugar, it's going to grow. If you limit the sugar that's available to that cancer cell, it's not going to grow nearly as quickly. So that's step number one in helping to start to manage things, really to limit the sugar that's available. It's like anybody at a buffet, the more food you have there, the more you're going to gorge on. And the cancer cell is not a whole lot different, really. If there's sugar all about and it's plentiful, the cancer cell is going to be in heaven. And that's not what we're aiming for. We want a cancer cell that's not feeling comfortable, or we want to create an environment in the body that's inhospitable to the presence of that cancer cell. And so sugar is a big part of that. So what do? Well, we certainly recommend, for many patients, is, getting to the ultimate goal, which ideally would be a ketogenic physiology. So the diet comes down in sugar and carbohydrate level until it starts living more on ketones as its fuel source rather than sugar. Now, going from a typical diet to that is quite a drastic step for many people. So we take a stepwise approach and just limiting and reducing how many sugars and carbohydrates a patient is eating. And different patients will come, different lengths down that road towards ketogenic, but many people will get to ketogenic. And that's really important because that's the way we can keep the sugar level and the sugar available to cancer cells at a minimum. Now, while we're doing that, you alluded to, the Krebs cycle. This is how the body uses oxygen to create more energy from the sugar it has available to it. Now, all of our body's cells use lots and lots of oxygen to help to keep their energy up. Cancer cells don't. They don't use oxygen much at all. So this is the key, physiological trait of most cancers. And we can help to encourage those cancer cells to start using oxygen a little bit more readily and to help to resurrect, if you will, their oxygen metabolism and their Krebs cycle function, which might sound as though it's not going to be helpful in this case. We don't want to give them anything that's going to help them produce more energy. But a cancer cell that has its Krebs cycle and oxygen utilization working for it, it turns on all of those things that prevent it from continuing to grow. That was a mouthful right there. Did you catch all that?
It's great.
Okay, thank you. And these are ultimately the things that we want to do. We want to limit sugar and encourage the use of oxygen in the cancer cell again. And this is sort of the metabolic approach to cancer. And this is true whether we're aiming for prevention or whether we're into the treatment. Now, we don't use these things, in isolation and alone. There's much more to it than that, but really down to the fundamental elements of it, that's what we're starting with.
Wonderful. Yeah. I mean, so again, the importance of exercise when it comes to this. And I'm glad you brought out ketogenic. I just talked about ketogenic diets on the last podcast about when we're going through dissecting diets. And I said, keto is not a favorable diet when we think about eating healthy in a healthy individual. However, its benefits with ketogenesis and a cancer type of prognosis, it's invaluable. So do you feel like fasting or intermittent fasting could play a good role in prevention of cancer, or even just going through phases where you just go through bouts of fasting or intermittent fasting, or even a ketogenic diet for a short amount of time? Is that healthy in the long run to repeat and cycle through?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yes, absolutely, it is. And fasting is critical for all of us to be into in some form or another. And there are doctors out there who, have strategies that they follow themselves and encourage in many of their patients as well, and promote sort of to the greater public. And those might include, going through their 3 months of regular life, and then after 3 months passes, they'll do, okay, well, time for 1 week of pure ketogenic. Then after that, I'm going to fast for a week. And coming out of that fast, ketogenic for another week, and then on to sort of going about their healthy lifestyle. It's not like they're going back into some crazy awful diet, but they go back into a good diet that's more complete, that's not ketogenic, but has more carbohydrates and sugars in it. And that's an approach that many people will take if they're really being mindful of how their body's physiology is being maintained over time. Now, one doesn't have to go that far down that road. And so, for example, probably you and I do some level of intermittent fasting, or known as time-restricted feeding. And this is important for all of us. And even if it's just a 12-hour overnight fast, that's really, really important for keeping our metabolism in good shape. Many people do substantially more than that. And the longer hours, the better for the body's physiology and metabolism. And as we were speaking to earlier, the better one's metabolism is, the more likely they're going to be able to defend and be resilient against cancer developing. So for sure, intermittent fasting and fasting in support of metabolism has a role in prevention of cancer.
Yeah, you nailed it. That's why we intermittent fast and give our bodies a chance to improve their metabolism. So in healthy individuals, we do a weight loss program here as well, and it encompasses intermittent fasting and the whole food diet. We're not quite getting them into ketogenesis, but we're giving them exactly what they need in long hours. We recommend 16 hours of fasting daily for 40 days, and the results are amazing. People who have weight to lose more than 30 pounds. It's pretty amazing. But we're talking about longevity here. We're talking about how my dad's made it the last 12 years, cancer free, and these are it. So this is wonderful. I mean, I truly think naturopathic doctors, functional medicine doctors you have to have one in your Rolodex. That's how old I am. Rolodex in your cell phone that you can lean on. And the nice thing about it, some of them are concierge, some of them are private practice like yourself. You will pick up the phone at any time and help a new patient. You still accept new patients, and most do. So finding one that you trust, and that's why I brought Colin onto the show. This may have hit home for somebody. You can call him. And he's got his network that he graduated with, and all the naturopaths across the country as well that he can put you in with. Having a functional medicine doctor in your corner that is as knowledgeable as Colin is invaluable, because then you have somebody to lean on when the medical system fails you, which will happen almost all the time because they're under a crunch. And I divide, what we do, Colin, as vitalistic versus pathogenic. Two very different things. When medicine's waiting for a pathology,
that's right.
We're not. We're trying to prevent the pathology. We're trying to prevent that diagnosis. They really cannot do anything for you until your A1C has been above a certain level for more than 90 days. Then they know what to do. Or you've had a heart attack. Then they know what to do. But we're trying to make sure your A1C never gets that high and that you never have a heart attack. You know what I'm saying? So that's where this stuff all comes from. This is wonderful. I'm going to put all your contact information here on the podcast. Again, Vive Integrative Health, Dr. Colin Race. His wife's a beautiful person too that works with him. Good tag team there. Calgary. But again, with these days and age, you can call us from anywhere. We're more than happy to help you and connect you with our networks to stay healthy. Anything else that we missed there? I think that was a great episode.
You know what? Can I share a little analogy with you just quickly?
Yeah.
This is how I frame the approach to medicine that we ought to be taking. And I'll often say to patients that, that the first thing we ought to be doing when something comes up in our health is we ought to be seeing a naturopathic doctor. For the reason that, going back to, again, where we started, we're going to look below the surface and find the ultimate causes and the root causes of why the symptom has come up. So every time something comes up, we want to look and identify those root causes. But we've all been taught since we were kids that the answer to a symptom is a medication, to simply suppress it. Now, this is the analogy. Imagine when we're born, we have this little balloon inside us. And every time something happens that's inflammatory or it's harmful to us or whatnot, this balloon begins to inflate. And it continues to do so. But we don't know that we have this balloon there. It continues to inflate and inflate. The more fast food we eat, the more toxins in our environment, etc. It inflates and inflates. We only know that that balloon is there once it springs a leak. And that leak is like a symptom. And so if we follow the medical advice that we're typically given, we take a medication, we suppress the symptom, and essentially that's just putting a patch over the leak in the balloon. But it doesn't stop the problem itself. So that balloon continues to expand and builds in pressure and grows bigger as we grow until it springs another leak. And then if we're lucky, we can put a patch on that one too, and we can take care of that symptom. Now, you can imagine where this leads. If we're not treating the causes and the reasons why this balloon is expanding continually through our lives, well, it's going to lead to a poorer outcome. And ultimately, I think this is the reason why we get sort of sicker and more symptomatic as we get older, because that balloon is beyond capacity now. Eventually, it's going to pop, and then the big one kind of happens. So this is why I feel naturopathic medicine, or those such as yourself and Christine, who are really looking deeper into what's going on with the human body, are really vital to the foundation of our health, our well-being, our society, and certainly the medical system. So to answer your question shortly, do I have anything to add? Yes, it's just that. Just this analogy that I like to share to make the whole concept of all of this clearer for those. And please share that as widely as you can.
Yeah, we will. Absolutely. And thank you for doing an analogy. That's what I'm known as, the analogy guy. That's great. It's the best way. I think it's the best. And I love that. The balloon, I'm going to now use that. I use a lot of things. I remember you once told me about, a breakfast sandwich in Canada, it's Tim Hortons. Here it's Dunkin' Donuts, whatever. But eating one of those, the immediate physiological effects that happen to you within the next 20 minutes. And I was like, you're right. It's so vital. It's vital. The things that we do in every moment. You're a good friend, Colin, because we think alike, my friend. Good job. Keep saving lives. Appreciate you. We'll have all the contacts there. I'm sure we'll have you back. I'm going to have another question where I'm like, hey, I got to bring Colin back on the show. It's great.
I love that. Thank you so much, Enrico. I really appreciate this time.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Living a Full Life podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.